Alrighty, how's everybody doing? This is Parker with the Catholicism in the Car podcast, and I have Judson Carroll with me to talk about the history of Catholic medicine. And I, I'm really excited, Judson, about this topic. I honestly had never thought about it a lot before you contacted me, and I'm excited to learn to hear what you have to say. I know you've done a lot of research on this topic, and so I guess let's start first. What got you interested in medicine in general, in urban medicine, let's say in general?
All right. Well, first of all, just let me say thanks for letting me do this. Thanks for having me on your
Yeah.
show. I really appreciate it. And I'm always thrilled to talk about this topic. So, what got me interested in herbal medicine? Um, when I was about 15, I had a very liberal high school teacher, and she had convinced me to get into yoga and become a vegetarian. And I'm kind of a big guy. I'm about 6'4". I'm about 210, 220 pounds lean, and that just wrecked my health. That's when my body was growing like crazy, and that just made me so sick and hungry all the time. And I got really into foraging in the mountains of North Carolina because I was hungry all the time.
Oh
I
my
love
gosh. Okay.
mushrooms, and they're just mushrooms everywhere where I live. All kinds of like gourmet mushrooms like crazy. And my mother introduced me to this old mountain fella, big burly guy with a beard, and I was talking with him about foraging and living in off the land, and it was really interesting. And he ended up being a member of the Hicks family of Beech Mountain. The Hicks family had basically made their living gathering herbs and selling them and practicing herbal medicine for hundreds of years, at least 200 years. The old cabin that they lived in 10 miles down a dirt road had one electric light bulb that was the only electricity, no indoor plumbing. It was like stepping back in time
Oh my
150
goodness.
years minimum. And they taught me herbal medicine. I became an apprenticed herbalist at the age of 15, and it was great. And I eventually started eating meat again and got real healthy. you know.
Okay. Okay.
So that's how I got into herbal medicine. But that also kind of sets up that kind of dichotomy, because if you think about the modern concept of herbal medicine, it's very much related to the New Age movement and Eastern religions and witchcraft and all that. But see, the way I learned it was quite the opposite. One, I've been given bad advice by a New Age type person. And then I came to this old mountain family that was very, very Christian. And so
Okay.
I did not learn herbal medicine as some kind of woohoo kind of thing.
Right.
Years later, I studied traditional Chinese medicine for about a decade, and that was really interesting. But I eventually left it. When I came back to the mountains after spending about 10 years working in politics and journalism and being as far away from that world as possible,
Okay.
Obamacare just passed. And as a self employed person, suddenly I was without insurance. And I realized I'm going to have to take care of myself for a while. And so I started looking around me, and there are herbs everywhere that I recognize. And I discovered a book by Maria Trebin that was written in probably the 70s or 80s, Health Through God's Pharmacy. And it was really a modernization, a crystallization of German folk medicine. And German folk medicine really starts with like the Benedictines in the Middle Ages. We're getting up to St. Hildegard von Bingen, Abbot Walfrid Strabo. Father Nape was very important in the mid 1800s, late 1800s. He wrote the best-selling herbal book in the world. It's sold only second to the Bible worldwide. It was one of the first books ever uh, plagiarized. There were unauthorized
Really?
copies and fake copies in different languages. Yeah,
Oh
and
my
he was
goodness.
great. It's called My Water Cure. If anybody's interested in his book, he had an apprentice named Brother Aloysius. He was a Swiss monk who was really great herbalist, and then there was Father Johann Künzle from Switzerland as well. He was so important that about the time that the Nazis were really taking over and they were really trying to destroy folk traditions, um, really formalize science and medicine in a very Germanic way, very stringent way. Um, he was sued. This was a Swiss priest was sued for practicing medicine without a license, essentially. And he went to court and proved his herbs could treat diabetes at the time better than the doctor's medicines. That
Really?
legalized herbal medicine in Germany and Germanic countries, when at the same time in America, we were having the Pure Foods and Drugs Act and different things basically outlawing herbal medicine for a time. So going, full circle. And, during that time, I converted to Catholicism, and suddenly I find all these wonderful Catholic herbalists, and it all just kind of
Okay.
came home for me.
Okay. Oh my goodness. So have you been doing this? Have you been doing this full time, the herbal medicine deal? Like, do you just write about it and teach people
Yeah, I'm
about
more
it?
of a teacher. I
Okay.
teach and write. I do
Uh-huh.
a lot of like hands-on plant walks in the woods, teaching people to identify plants, how to
Okay.
make the
Yep. Very
medicine.
important skill.
Yeah, it is, because I mean, if you think about like recently with our supply chain issues, whether it was during COVID or like the diesel shortage they're talking about now, you go to the store and there's nothing on the shelves. You really
Yeah.
need to. I think it's very important. That's why several of my titles are like herbal medicine for preppers, homesteaders, and permaculture people is one of my titles. I have a herb gardening for the same category, and it's
Okay.
kind of with that in mind. It's like you need to uh, be able to identify and know how to use what's around you, because we never know when there's not going to be something on the shelves at the drugstore or at the grocery store. Or you may not
Okay.
be able to get to a doctor, or if you
Right.
chose not to get a vaccine, the doctor may not even see you.
Yeah. Right. 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 And you're in North Carolina, is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, mountains in
So
North Carolina, Blue Ridge
okay.
Mountains.
Okay. And you're in the mountains themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
If people want to find out kind of where I am, if you look up Grandfather Mountain or Linville Falls, I basically live right in the middle of those two beautiful places out in the way deep in the woods, very remote and peaceful.
Okay. Oh my goodness. That sounds wonderful.
Oh, it
Yeah.
is. It is.
So tell me a little bit about your conversion to Catholicism. What were you
Uh-huh.
doing before? And then how did all of that kind of jive into your love of herbal medicine?
Okay, so I had no plans to be an herbalist, and I kind of left that behind. I was studying economics and planning on going into politics, and then 9/11 happened, and I couldn't serve because my grandmother just had a heart attack, and I had to take care of her and the farm and everything. I had to leave school for a time to do that, and the minute I got able to go back to college. For some reason, I thought it would be a good idea to go up to Liberty University and get involved with Dr. Falwell on pro-life issues.
Hmm.
And I got to Liberty University and found out see, I'd been raised kind of Southern Baptist. I'd worked as a Methodist youth minister for a while.
Oh,
And I get up to Liberty and find out what Protestants really believe. I had not really had that experience before of their full doctrine. And I kept thinking, yeah, this isn't what the Bible says. This is absolutely not what the Bible says. And I thought, well, who are the smartest people I know? And at that time, it was William F. Buckley and, various people like that. Actually, G. Gordon Liddy, he used to have a talk show. He was controversial, the G Man, they called him. He
okay.
became sort of a mentor to me while I was up that way. And they were all Catholic. Pat Buchanan was Catholic, and all different ones that I was listening to at the time. And it hit me, well, I need to look into Catholicism. And when I look into anything, I always go to the beginning. Well, if you look into the beginning, you have to go to the early church fathers. And by the time you get through volume one of what the I'm going to mispronounce it, the early church fathers, the first volume of the big set of the,
Yeah.
the library.
Yeah.
By the time you get through that first volume, there's no doubt, you know. I mean, it says specifically, I mean, all these controversies that Protestants have about, do you go to church on Sunday or do you keep the Jewish Sabbath? Oh, they've solved that in the first 100 years.
Right. Right.
Obey your bishops. I think, I don't know, was it Eusebius or Ignatius? I mean, one of the
Yeah.
first ones is saying, to the Catholic Church. I mean, he's just expressly writing the epistle to the Catholic Church at whatever. May have been Barnabas. I don't remember.
Very cool. Okay. So then how did that then your conversion to Catholicism, how did that kind of meld into your love of herbal medicine? And how,
Oh,
I
it's a
guess then, how were
circuitous
you
one.
especially able to um, reconcile? Because I would imagine a lot of people have the question, why would I look into herbal medicine as opposed to just using the
Yeah.
conventional medicine that we have today? So that's a
Well,
few questions there, but
it is, and I don't want to get too controversial, but um, I would say over the past 30 years, every single member of my family has who's passed away did not die necessarily from natural causes, but in the course of their treatment, they were died either because of malpractice, medical error, or medical abuse, or overprescription. Overprescription is a very big issue. And in fact, if you look up, those four causes combined are actually now the leading cause of death in America. The leading cause of death in America is not car accidents or heart disease or gun
really,
violence. It's medical abuse, malpractice, overprescription, and medical error.
okay.
And having had really bad experiences myself with doctors. I mean, when I was 19, I blew out a couple of discs. I was partially paralyzed for 2 years. I was actually healed by a miracle, and that's actually what got me on the path to become, like I said, a Methodist youth minister before I went up to Liberty University and all that.
Oh my goodness.
Um, yeah, I mean, the doctor said I'd never walk again, and my mother's like, "There's some people there praying for you," and this heat went up my back, and I was healed in an instant. I actually had had scoliosis pretty badly before then. And so I can prove it because I became almost an inch taller.
Wow. Oh my goodness. So
So I'm pretty
during
proud.
this instance of prayer, you just felt this heat in your
Mhm.
back, and it was an
Oh, yeah.
instant.
And I'm sitting over there just totally out of it, on pain meds, not even
Really?
clued in, not even really believing in what they're doing. And suddenly, boom. And so that's a life changing experience. So that is really the genesis of my, spiritual path. But
Okay.
then, when I went to the doctors, they're like looking at their x-rays and I'm like, you never were injured in the first place. You were just begging for the meds. I'm like, I was just in here a few weeks ago. I was using canes. I went 10 days and nights without sleeping one time because the pain was so intense.
How
And
old
then
were you at this point?
19. So I
19.
was healed
Okay.
by about 21 or so.
Okay.
And, I had bad asthma as a kid and the asthma medications, uh, they're actually like the precursors for what people make methamphetamine out of. So they were really heavy, harsh drugs, when I was a kid. And they made me really out of it. And I'd get winded. I couldn't really run and do everything. But those medications actually caused a cardiac event in my early 20s. I mean, they were that
Oh
hard on the
really?
heart. So I had to figure out how to do things with herbs. And so that's why herbs became important to me. And I really, like I said, how would I put this? I think doctors are very good at what they do very well. If I had a heart attack or I broke a leg, I would definitely be running to the emergency room.
Hmm.
But for a head cold, I'm not going to a doctor.
Hmm. Okay. Sure. Sure. I guess you're saying more the things that are um, where doctors may have to do a little more guesswork.
Mhm.
Uh, you
Or if
might
severe
seek herbal
trauma,
medicine first, something
yeah,
like that. Okay.
or severe trauma, severe injury, triage type situation. I mean, they're very good at emergency medicine. There's no doubt about it. Um, and well, I should go ahead and address this now. People always ask me about cancer, and I always say I don't say a word about cancer. I can give you some links. I'll send you some information. You can do some your own research. But I cannot stand herbalists who give people false hope.
Sure. Yeah.
And yeah,
'Cause, I
there's
mean, that's
one.
really an insidious thing.
Oh yeah,
It
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 is.
and
There's a
it's
guy named Dr.
completely imprudent.
Sebi. I'll let you look up Dr. Sebi, Sebi. He was very popular in the 80s and 90s. He was like Michael Jackson's herbalist or something.
Really.
Guys like that give us all a bad name.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So yeah, so you're not somebody who's saying don't go to the doctor, don't go to the hospital. You're just saying on certain things, you know, the the doctors, they're doing a lot more guesswork on it, and so maybe seeking more natural methods would be a better alternative probably initially. Is that kind
Yeah.
of what you would
Well,
summarize?
um, there's so many different categories of herbs. All right. So, like I mentioned, a head cold. If you go to a doctor, they're probably going to give you an antibiotic, which is
Mm,
really going to do nothing for a head cold. It could prevent a sinus infection. It could prevent maybe if you were starting to show signs of a bronchial infection, but it's not going to treat the virus.
sure.
Viruses don't respond to antibiotics,
Right.
and like the CDC and different AMA and different organizations keep asking them, please don't do this. Please don't hand out antibiotics like candy. You're creating
Yeah.
vaccine resistant superbugs, but they keep doing it. I don't know why. Maybe the pharmaceutical industry has an incentive to keep selling a lot of pills. I don't
Hmm.
know.
Hmm.
Um, with, say, COVID, for instance, I didn't get vaccinated. I have antiviral herbs. For me,
Okay.
it was more important to build my immune system. And, once you've had a virus, you can't get the same version of the same virus twice. You
Right.
have natural immunity. So I was very pleased to get through my first bout with COVID. I did not know it would mutate and I'd have COVID twice. I
Right.
still had
Right.
antiviral herbs. I have herbs that are expectorants that clear the lungs of mucus, herbs for fevers, herbs for all kinds of stuff. There are herbs. Um, there's all category of women's herbs, herbs for menstrual cramps and bleeding and such as that, and emotional issues. There are herbs called adaptogens, which just help the body deal with stress. There are herbs for sleep. There are herbs from the most mundane thing, like an eye wash or a sore throat, to, really, oh, excuse me, really powerful herbs that are tonic and revitalizing and can make a world of difference. Just today, this is 1 week now of drinking Gynostemma tea. I talked with an herbalist recently, and he said, you got to check out Gynostemma. And I'd used it a little in formulas. Turns out it's an adaptogen that's about 10 times more potent than ginseng. And I started drinking
Okay.
this tea every morning instead of coffee. And in a week's time, inflammation's reduced. I'm in an area right now where I have a lot of allergies. I'm away from home right now. Allergies are better. Um, Calm, more energy. It's not magic at all. It's, God gave us these plants to use for our benefit.
Right. Do you know, have people, I'm sure they have, looked into the empirical side of the herbal medicine and exactly how the chemical reactions in your body, how it
Yeah,
binds to
there's
you,
a ton of
you know,
research on that.
because it would seem like, like you were saying at the beginning, lots of people assume that herbal medicine is just some sort of new agey
Mhm.
thing. It's very superstitious. Um, Whereas, I mean, if you look at the history of humanity, until the last 100 years or so, all medicine was herbal medicine virtually.
Yeah,
And
pretty
so,
much. Yeah,
and it only makes sense that these things, which many of our prescription medicines are made out of herbs, right? Um,
well, now they're mainly
Although they're
made in
probably
test tubes
synthetic.
and laboratories, but yeah, until let's say about 1930, 1940, almost all medicine was plant-based.
Okay.
And that's why the Hicks family up in Beech Mountain, could make a living gathering those herbs. They'd sell them to Wilcox, and Wilcox would sell them on to pharmaceutical companies. But
Okay.
speaking of that, it's really interesting. The guy who introduced using certain other chemicals and metals and such into medicine, he's the father of toxicology, is one of the most controversial figures in Catholic history. He was Paracelsus Theophrastus
Yeah.
Bastus von Hohenheim.
Yes.
He was
Paracelsus.
an
Okay.
alchemist, an alchemist from
Uh-huh.
Germany, but his father was a great physician. And he became, a doctor. His father was an herbalist. He was controversial because he used German herbs, whereas at the time, everything in the pharmacopoeia was all from the old Greek herbalists. They didn't really recognize the indigenous herbs at
Ah,
that point.
okay.
So, but what's interesting about Paracelsus, everyone thinks he was all into like mysticism and the occult and such as that.
Hmm.
Several of the books that are under his name were written by other people, trying to kind of piggyback on his reputation. But he actually died a faithful Catholic. He said he would not burn with Luther, and he was buried in a Catholic cemetery. So That's another one that's
For what
fascinating
that's worth.
character.
Yeah. Right. Right. Okay. So, and then on the question of if you were to give kind of an apology, a defense of herbal medicine to those who would say that uh, we should we should really only trust the more modern prescription meds, what would you say to that? Because I imagine those people, they're probably coming from a very empirical standpoint, or at least they think they are, right?
Yeah,
And so on the level of like, have you done much research into that empirical dimension
oh
of
sure.
herbal medicine? Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, there's tons of research. Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm just looking right now at my shelf, and I've got the physician's desk reference to herbal medicine. This
Okay.
is the same PDR that a doctor uses when he's looking at prescription medicines, but this one's for herbal medicines. And if you go under each one of them, it's going to list like 300 clinical trials, or it'll say
Wow.
unproven use, folk use only. It's going to tell you that. It's going to tell you if there's any toxicity. If you y'all can look at this online. King's Medical Dispensatory from 1898 is published online. This would be a medical dispensatory that a pharmacist would use, that a doctor would use. And you can go through there. And 1898 sounds like a long time ago, but in the history of medicine, it's like the blink of an eye.
Yeah. Yeah.
Click an herb, look at it, and you'll see what physicians were using it for at the time, proven uses. And one of the things that I think is kind of interesting. A lot of people say, well, show me the peer reviewed research, show me the data. And that's not really hard to do for a lot of herbs. For some, it is. Actually, back in the 90s, St. John's wort was very popular for a while. It had been shown clinically that it could help with seasonal depression. And it elevates serotonin, it's antiviral, it's anti-inflammatory, it has some great uses. Well, immediately on the heels of that, a study came out and said, nope, it's bunk. It's nothing. It doesn't do anything for depression.
Ah.
Well, one of my teachers happened to kind of tell me the secret to this. There were 3 laboratories hired by pharmaceutical companies essentially to tell the world that St. John's wort doesn't work. And they were given a quantity of the herb to study and test. Well, they got in touch with him, and his name is Michael Moore, or was. It's not the obese filmmaker. He was an herbalist and a really good one. And
Okay.
they said, I don't understand. Not only is it not doing anything for depression, but it's doing stuff we don't even know what it is. And he said, make sure you got the right herb. And they tested it; it wasn't even the right plant. So the studies that came out saying St. John's wort did nothing were not even the right plant. It turns out guys in white suits are not really good at identifying plants, and a lot of herb pickers apparently weren't very good at identifying the plants either. So once they actually got St. John's wort, they found out it was good, but by then the cat was out of the bag on the fault studies. But one of the things that I like to do is when I look at herbs uses, I like to check all the history I can on that herb, different cultures. If I find the same use for the same herb over 4,000 years on 3 different continents by tribes that speak different languages and weren't communicating with each other, to me, that's empirical evidence. To me, that's enough to tell me this herb, it is good for what they say it's good for. I mean, if Native Americans found the same property, ancient Chinese, as did the ancient Greeks, as did the Elizabethan English and the Benedictines and all that, then I'm sold on that herb.
Okay. Okay. Now, would you be able to give us like a history of medicine in the Catholic world in
Sure,
particular, maybe
sure.
starting from as early as you can. Um,
Okay. Well, let's
give kind
start
of a
then.
general overview there.
Um, I guess, well, we could start with the Jewish tradition. Really interesting. Uh, there's a website out there called the Encyclopedia Judaica, and that's where I always start if I want to find some Jewish history, and then I look it up. And in the Talmud are listed several medicinal herbs, and there's a tradition that says the archangel Raphael originally gave the uses of herbs to Noah, at least, and maybe further back than that.
Really?
Yeah. And they list several herbs that are still in use today. There's not a lot of mention of herbs in the Bible per se. I mean, they talk about wormwood, but that's really because wormwood is such a bitter substance. Or they
Okay.
talk about, the manna from heaven being like bread made from cumin, coriander, actually. And coriander was a very precious spice at the time, and it finds a lot of use in Egyptian medicine. And, I think we can be very confident that the Jews, when they were in Egypt, the Hebrews, I guess, learned a lot about Egyptian medicine because they have a tendency to be very curious people who want to learn everything wherever they end up. And we see a lot of exchange between them. Some of the oldest records really do come from Egypt, the Ebers papyrus, from ancient Babylon and Samaria. We've got herbal records. But then the Greeks, really, I mean, the Greeks were probably the best herbalists of the era. And we've got famous writers like Dioscorides, Materia Medica, Pliny the Elder, Galen. Galen's really the father of modern medicine. He was big into surgery and sorry, my dog's making a little noise over here. He was big into dissection and all kinds of really gruesome stuff, but he taught the world a lot about anatomy, and he was quite the herbalist as well. And the Greek medicine was basically adopted by the Roman medicine. And the Roman physicians at that time would travel with the armies, and they would treat the soldiers, and they would treat the wealthy, and all that. And they, probably weren't very available to the common man. And especially if you were not a Roman citizen, they wouldn't have even messed with you. But there was folk medicine as well. And we see that a lot in, going back to the Jews, the Jewish ghettos, they used artichoke very much, not only as food, but medicine.
Really?
Well, yeah. And
Huh. Okay.
those deep fried artichokes are delicious, by the way.
They sure are. I just had some the other week.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, that's good stuff. But artichoke is a liver tonic. It's a bitter herb, and it helps with liver inflammation. So by the time early Christianity comes along, you got a very stratified society. I mean, Christians were persecuted, and the poor of Rome did not have access to medicine. And some of the earliest writings of the Catholic Church talk about forming free hospitals. They started hostels for visitors and then hospitals. There was a big controversy in the early, like before 100 or so, I guess, maybe around 120, come to think of it, about whether they should heal people just with the anointing of the sick and prayer, or should they use herbal medicine. And then a plague hits. And the bishops at the time organized these hospitals, crews of men. Every strong, healthy Christian man was to go out and, if need be, forcibly drag in anyone who was sick for treatment. And they absolutely, that is one of the major establishing points of the church. When the poor of Rome and surrounding areas realized that the Christians would take them in and care for them, regardless of if they were, whether or not they were Christian, regardless their race, their ethnicity, their nationality, they would care for them as their own family. And they also organized teams to bury the dead. Apparently, a lot of the pagan cultures were afraid to touch the dead bodies. They leave them in the streets.
Oh,
And the
sure.
same Christians rescued the unwanted children from the trash heap. And, by the time Charlemagne comes along, the Holy Roman Emperor, the Christians were the leading medical force, and he wrote it was the Capitulaire. That's what comes to mind. And he ordered that most households should have had a garden growing vegetables and a few herbs, but all church properties have physic gardens, and all monasteries, at least, open hospitals.
Ah,
And so the Benedictines were the main force. You have the order of Saint Benedict of Nursia, and he said, primary first thing, care for the sick. And so every Benedictine monastery, to my knowledge, had a free hospital. And as they spread throughout Europe, first through Central Europe, and then on, I mean, by the time we get to Christian Ireland, one of the first saints after Saint Patrick was Saint Fiacre, and he was an herbalist. He's one of the patron saints of herbal medicine. Um, I can't remember exactly what year that is. It's in my book, or anybody can look it up in any Catholic encyclopedia if they want to. Saint Gertrude of Nivelle, I think it is. It's in Belgium. She was an herbalist. She's one of the patron saints of herbal medicine.
Okay.
They really took a lot of the Greek medicine, but they were smart enough to combine it with indigenous tradition. A lot of Irish herbs start showing up. A lot of British herbs start showing up. And then by about 1080, 1100, we get to probably the greatest herbalist who ever lived, St. Hildegard von Bingen.
Yes, she has just whole books that she wrote on the subject, correct?
Two of them,
Yeah,
yeah.
just massive
Yeah.
tomes. Yeah.
Physica and Causa et Curae, I believe. And now her herbal medicine is so frustrating when I hear, like when I read like Wikipedia or something, that they just dismiss her knowledge as she used the herbs at the time of the Benedictine tradition. No. First of all, she was sick. She was blind most of her childhood. She was not very literate or educated. She got her knowledge from speaking with God. I mean, she said it was the voice of the living light. And that's why she's one of the doctors of the church. I mean, her works on theology and doctrine and man, God, and the universe. Her system of herbal medicine is incomprehensible to the normal human mind. She was seeing, she described cells before there were microscopes. She described
Really?
viruses. Yeah, as ghostly worms. That's what she thought a virus was a ghostly
Okay.
worm. That's
Okay.
not far from the truth. Viruses
Yeah,
are really
no.
neither dead nor alive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, she described physics, the energy. What's the word for that? I can't remember. It's a field of physics where they study essentially energy, as vibrations. All matter is vibrations, right? She explained how just looking at certain colors and certain lights and such would have a soothing effect on the mind that was disturbed.
Oh my
And
goodness.
yeah, I mean, such,
Yeah.
such amazing stuff. She actually even has a recipe for cookies in her book, Physica, that helps with ADHD and ADD. I mean, if you feed your kid these cookies, you could probably get them off Ritalin, which I'm not
Really?
saying officially. I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving any
Uh-huh.
official advice. But
Right, right,
yeah,
right.
they're calming cookies that were supposed to help kids with their studies.
No way.
Oh, she was
So
awesome. Yeah.
St. Hildegard of Bingen cookies. We need to start making
Oh,
those
yeah.
at our parishes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Everybody, it'll make us more disposed for prayer, apparently, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my
Well,
goodness.
that's
That's
history up to
crazy.
about 1100. I mean, and then you have like I believe it was Charlemagne again when he was going into a battle, and there was another plague sweeping through, and I think was it Saint Michael the Archangel in this one showed him blessed thistle, and that became a very effective remedy for whatever that virus was going around at that time.
Really?
Yeah,
So
so
it's a plant that is still known as the blessed thistle?
that's
Is that
there's so many herbs
really?
that are that have
Oh my
religious
gosh.
affiliations. Like I talked about St. John's wort. It blooms
Uh-huh.
on St. John's Day, and it's associated with St. John. There's there's milk thistle or Ciliabum marianum, and that's named after Our Lady. And the legend says that actually some of her milk fell on the plant, and it's speckled with white, and it was blessed. And sage was a
Okay.
very popular Greek herb. Um, it was said by, I think it was Hippocrates, if why should a man die if he has sage growing in his garden? It was thought to be a cure-all for just about everything. Um, there's an old legend that when the Holy Family was fleeing to Egypt, they hid in sage bushes, and sage would be forever blessed. It's kind of ironic because around Halloween there was someone was circulating this video of this Protestant minister saying, how evil Halloween is, and you have to get all these things out of your house. And one of the main ones he was so upset about was sage. And he's like, sage is used by witches in casting spells, and I'm like, yeah, sage is also used in sausage. You gotta throw out your Jimmy Dean,
Yes,
dude.
yes, exactly. Oh my gosh. Okay. So that's up to about the 11th century, the 1000s, and then how does it
Yeah.
kind of develop through the High Middle Ages and then into the
Well, I
Renaissance?
think
And
stepping back just a little bit, the name of the school escapes me right now. The first medical school ever official medical school ever built. It's in Italy, and it was founded, according to legend, by a Christian, a Jew, and a Muslim. And they brought together their traditions of herbal medicine, and it's still around today. So we don't have to look too far to find the history if we want to look for it,
Wow.
But going up through the monks spreading herbal medicine throughout the world. Then, of course, let's see, I already talked about Paracelsus, what an interesting character he was. By the time we get into his era of about, the 1400s, 1500s, professional guilds were really taking over medicine.
There were like guilds of physicians, basically.
Yeah, guilds of
Okay.
physicians and apothecaries.
Really?
They would not allow anyone that wasn't a member to practice, and that was one of the controversies with Paracelsus. Is he hated the guilds. He thought they were cheating people, and he thought they were using counterfeit herbs and bad formulas. And so he was actually under threat of death and had to flee from country to country because he wouldn't comply. And he also upset people by teaching his students in the university in German instead of Latin. And he would invite non-paying people. He said it should be open to the common people. Come on in, and so that really upset the establishment as well. But then we get to Protestant Reformation, if that's what they want to call it. In England at the time, the greatest herbalist was John Parkinson. He was Catholic, and he was herbalist to King Henry. And he was one of the few members of the court who was not beheaded, even though he would not.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
Yeah, even though he would not abandon Catholicism, he was that well respected.
Really?
But as that happened, you had this great displacement of Catholic scholars. The universities were taken over by the Anglican Church. The hospitals, the guilds were very much taken over by the Anglicans, and they would not allow Catholics to join. And what happened was almost like in the American Civil War when the carpetbaggers moved in. You had like a lower middle class that suddenly saw their opportunity to rush in and take over because the educated, wealthier Catholics had their land confiscated and were pushed out. Well, in comes John Gerard, and there's like, if you read Parkinson, then you read Gerard, you can see like here's this like height of knowledge in Parkinson, and then here's Gerard just writing what other people have written down. And so and this was also a great time of discovery. I mean, the English Empire was booming, and they were finding new plants. They were bringing in all this stuff. Gerard was actually a very interesting guy. He was neighbors with William Shakespeare. And he had this huge botanical garden for the Queen, and probably a lot of Shakespeare's plays were written right there. I mean, you could totally imagine Midsummer Night's Dream, And, anyway,
Really?
that's things started changing, and a lot of the medicine from the time of Parkinson to Gerard, there was a little degradation because there wasn't that real height of scholarship anymore. And you start seeing some misuse of Latin terms. You can see there the education was just not as good. And we get up to
because of the Anglican Revolution.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean they had taken over the colleges, and the professors were not as necessarily as learned as the ones who had been there just a generation earlier.
Because they had killed off all the Catholics, and so it's horrible. But yeah.
Oh yeah. But anyway, we get to Culpeper, Nicholas Culpeper was an apothecist. He was a member of the guild. He was Protestant, very anti-Catholic. Boy, did he hate Catholics. And he writes about that a lot in his book, about the papists and their superstitions. But what he hated more than anything was the guilds and the doctors and the pharmacists of the time that he thought were cheating people, ripping people off. And he took all the texts of the time and translated them from Latin into a common English. And they wanted him dead. He was the English version of Paracelsus a couple of generations earlier. Okay. And he was actually killed in the English Civil War. He worked as a surgeon in the war, but his works really opened up all that information that had been Greek and Latin to the English-speaking world.
Okay.
And
because they had lost their use of Latin, they couldn't read those
Well, the
texts.
common man would not have been able to understand what was written. And
Right.
as long as the guilds, the apothecaries, and the doctors could do everything in Latin, the common man had no chance of learning how to treat
Hmm.
himself.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of things, other things that happen, through time. The, the the witch trials, especially, and some really interesting stuff on that. Going back to Saint Hildegard, she was the first one to recommend using hops in beer. Hops is a bittering
Oh,
agent, a preservative.
yes.
Yeah,
She is like the
and
patron saint of beer, isn't she?
yeah,
That's one
she's
of
one
her
of them. Yeah,
things. Yeah.
and before then, they had a beer. They had beers that were made of many things. One was called Groot, and Groot was made with 3 herbs that are psychoactive and would cause people to go into a warlike frenzy. So imagine being at, I don't know, a
Really?
soccer game in Europe. You can imagine what the crowd would be like if they were drinking Groot, right?
Oh
So
my goodness.
when she comes up with hops, the church was very big on it because they want hops actually calms people down. Hops is mildly sedative, and it's actually slightly estrogenic. So as instead of getting people worked
Huh.
up for battle frenzy, it would make people sleepy and maybe a little grumpy if they had a few too many, but it wasn't, craziness that was going on before then. Well, on the heels of that, several large breweries opened, and they, especially in Germany, came up with these pure beer laws. Before then, this was also true in England, beer brewing was mostly something women did. They did in the cottage, and in order
Huh.
to advertise their wares, they wore long pointy hats, and they hung a broom up, and they had a big cauldron, right? That's actually where we get our modern concept of witches. And one of the ways they got people to stop drinking these craft cottage beers was to stir up a lot of scares over witches and witches' brews. And that was really just to benefit big brewing
Really?
companies. But that's another one of those cultural things that really changed the way people thought about herbs over time.
So they were okay, let me get this straight. So the women were, using these big cauldrons to make
Mhm.
beer, and then the the brewing companies, in order to stop kind of the
Yeah, put them out
middleman
of business.
from
Yeah,
put them out of business,
yeah.
started the witches. That and so what time was that?
Mm.
What time period?
I cannot remember. It's in my book, but
Okay,
if you look at the pure brewing acts in Germany, it's about that time.
interesting.
And yeah, they would say those witches are making all these potions that are going to make you see things and make you crazy, and some of those herbs would
Yeah.
actually.
Okay. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
and then of course there was actual witchcraft,
Right.
where especially they would use certain hallucinogenic herbs to manipulate people's minds and make them believe
Okay.
had a spell cast on them, like belladonna or mandrake,
Huh.
European mandrake. Is in the Datura family. It's like Jimson weed here in the United States, and it's powerfully hallucinogenic, poisonous, and it's not like hippie trippy hallucinations. It's like demons coming at you through walls and things chasing you through the
Oh
forest
my
kind of
goodness. Really?
hallucinations. Yeah.
Whoa.
And
So
you might see witches flying around on brooms if you had some.
okay. Huh. So a lot of that, this is just something I've never looked into. A lot of the witches, the reasons that they were being, thought of as demonic or in union with demonic spirits. I mean, of course, some of it probably was
Yeah, yeah.
legitimately
Saint Hildegard
demonic.
writes a lot about that,
Um,
about
right,
protection from witches and such. Yeah,
right. But that theory would be bolstered by the fact that they were having people take all these hallucinogenic
yeah,
herbs.
and
That is,
poisons. Yeah,
and
they
poisons.
used a lot
Okay.
of poisons too. Monk's aconite, also called wolf's bane because they used to use it to kill wolves. About one drop of that tincture will stop your heart in a blink of an eye.
Whoa,
Poison hemlock that killed.
Socrates.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's one of the big ones. Yeah, there are several, but yeah, they're serious poisons.
Wow.
That, and then there are others that are more subtle poisons, like lily of the valley has a digitalis-like effect. And in small doses, it's relaxing. It slows and strengthens the heart rate. Very good for you. In large doses, it's going to slow that heart down until it's barely beating. And that could put someone into a near coma.
Oh
And
my.
then in voodoo, they have certain herbs that are very similar. that cause zombie-like states, catatonic-like states, where people just do as they're told and they're in a hypnotic state, essentially.
Holy cow! Wow. Yeah, it's so fascinating how because would they have to do anything to the herb, or is it basically just eating it and that
Yeah, it
causes
depends on
the
the herb.
okay
It definitely depends on the herb. Like Lucretia Borgia loved using belladonna. At the time, belladonna, it's actually called, beautiful lady because they thought big dilated pupils were pretty. So when women would use small amounts of belladonna, so it was commonly uh, able to be purchased in Italy at the time, but it became one of her favorite poisons. And that would have been probably a tincture. That's just a tincture is just where you steep the herb in alcohol until the components of the herb are extracted. Decoction is essentially a strong tea. Some of the herbs in South America and Mexico that are strongly hallucinogenic are often used in the form of a decoction. And then, yeah, sometimes you can just eat the herb, obviously.
okay right
But don't.
right yeah yeah of course. And this is a very good reason why people should familiarize themselves with the herbs,
Oh,
particularly in
yeah.
their area,
Yeah.
right?
Where
Because
I live
you
in the mountains, got a lot of hippies, a lot of
okay
hippies.
uh-huh
And every year, a bunch of kids get sick and even die because they read in some book that Jimson weed is a hallucinogenic. And they'll smoke it or they'll take it in another way as a tincture, tea, whatever, and or just eat it. And it's very poisonous. It can kill you just as a poison. It can make you go psychotic, schizophrenic, and
like
any way you look
permanently,
at it. Oh yeah, yeah. You may not come
really?
back. Yeah. Oh, and any way you look at it,
Wow.
it's a terrible experience. And if more people knew about it, they wouldn't want to do it in the first place. But people read something in a book, there's a lot of bad books written. And if we stick closer to really the Catholic tradition of herbal medicine, we can be a lot more confident in the herbs and their use. There are a lot of herbal books written in the 60s, 70s by hippies, usually, a lot of psychedelic stuff, a lot of,
Okay.
and it's a lot of bad advice.
Jeez. Okay. Yeah, and well, it sounds like dangerous advice.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
read in a book years ago that nutmeg, this common, spice, nutmeg, would help with pain if you took it in like, I think it was maybe a 10-gram dose. It was a very large dose. And yeah, don't ever do that. Don't ever do that.
Really?
It,
What?
oh, it was one of the worst experiences of my life. First of all, it did nothing for pain. Well, it did a little bit. It has a slightly, it makes you a little giddy. It causes a little visual disturbances. It also
Okay.
causes the most intense migraine you will ever experience, an
Oh,
absolute stupor. You can't move, think, do anything. And my lungs were on fire. I mean, on fire. And this was just written, in some, 70s herb book by some, supposed I usually call them gurus. They're self-appointed experts on herbs. If you if you read my books, you'll notice I give tons of citations. I mean, a lot of times
okay.
people say, "Well, you're just quoting this book and quoting it." I'm like, "Yeah, well, I did a year's worth of research on this book, and I'm quoting 3,000 years of research, so you know
Right.
what you're doing. I'm not giving some insight like Saint Hildegard. I don't just know stuff."
Yeah, you probably shouldn't trust a lot of books if they don't have citations, especially if they're
Exactly.
talking about something as dangerous
Yes.
or as helpful as herbal medicine.
Mhm.
You're playing with fire here, and you need to have somebody who knows what they're doing. Right. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you're going to go out in the woods and pick the herbs yourself.
Hmm.
Like I was saying about aconite, monkshood or wolfsbane, when it's just coming out of the ground, it looks like wild geranium. And if you thought and wild geranium is a very useful herb. It's nice, astringent. It's good for throat, good for a lot of things. Um, but if you picked a leaf of that and ate it, you drop dead on the spot.
Oh wow. Okay. Now where is
Yeah,
that present? Is that kind of widely present in
it's
many
very
areas
widespread.
or
It's a popular ornamental plant. It's very pretty plant.
okay.
Just like digitalis, foxglove. Um, Foxglove is the original herb from which they made the heart medication digitalis. But if a kid eats one flower off that plant, they're going to drop dead.
Yeah.
People plant them in
Okay.
their garden. They have them in their landscape. The hellebores would fall into that category. Yeah, they're castor bean. Castor bean is what makes castor oil and ricin. So, and a lot
And
of
what
people
was the
use
second one that you said? Castor oil
ricin,
and what?
the
Ricin. What is
poison.
ricin? Oh,
Ricin is,
oh, really?
yeah, a
Okay.
favorite poison of terrorists. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
it's the one in Russia back in I think the 90s. Somebody like aerosolized it and killed hundreds of people in one shot. And it's just made from the castor bean plant. Anybody could literally do it in their kitchen, which I'm certainly not
Okay.
advocating. Uh, Fortunately, if they try to do it in their kitchen, they'd probably die in the process. So that's
Okay. Oh,
and there are other herbs.
you're saying arson or not?
Ricin,
No, rice.
Ricin, if I believe, if I remember
Okay.
correctly.
I've never heard about this. Okay.
Oh yeah, it's
Interesting.
a dangerous one. And it's the same plant that makes castor oil, and many people plant it as a backdrop in their garden. It has really pretty leaves. You'll see it all over the place. And then there are herbs that really should never be taken by a pregnant woman at all.
Uh,
The only the only documented uh, death from an herb was back decades ago. A lady read that she could cause an abortion by taking pennyroyal. Pennyroyal's in the mint family. It's a particularly strong mint. Okay,
okay.
you wouldn't think it was very dangerous, right?
Sure.
She got an essential oil of pennyroyal and took it and bled to death through every orifice of her body within an hour. So she
Oh
and the baby
my.
both died, obviously. And so I never recommend any herbs during pregnancy. There are certain herbs recommended by herbalists, like raspberry leaf. Raspberry leaf is used to strengthen the uterus. If you're interested in
Oh yeah.
that, look into
Okay.
books by women for women who are herbalists, is what I always say. There's a
Okay.
great tradition of herbalism through the midwives. Midwives were really the only people allowed to practice herbal medicine in America between about 1920 and 1950. It would
Really?
really crack down on a lot of herbal medicine. Yeah.
Okay.
But
Huh.
even raspberry leaf tea, there was a lady that instead of drinking 2 cups a day, decided to drink 2 gallons a day and did herself a great deal of harm.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Okay. So that brings up an interesting point. Are there talking about the midwives, are there today any sort of licensures for herbalists in certain
Yeah.
states?
No.
Um,
In Canada, they do. They have the licensed naturopaths and such. In America, practicing herbal medicine is still technically illegal. Only a
really?
doctor is allowed to practice medicine. So,
Okay.
for instance, I always say, I'm not giving you medical advice. I'm giving you information. Look it up, decide for yourself. And if you use herbs, you're treating yourself. I don't treat patients. I don't treat clients. I'm a
Uh-huh.
teacher. Now, there are many herbalists who will treat clients, and they have certain arrangements, very much like the disclaimer I just gave you. I'm giving you information. It's up to you to decide for yourself, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Um, but there are no, there are guilds. Again, we have herbalist guilds, we have professional associations, and I'm not a member of any of them because, as Groucho Marx said, I wouldn't join any club that would have me as a member.
Okay. Okay. Um, so I guess one of the big things, the very present cultural moments, is the COVID 19 virus, right?
Hmm.
And I think there have been a large section of Catholics that have been very weary uh, of the vaccines that have been produced, right? Yourself
Hmm.
included,
Yep.
myself included. I'm very wary of it. I've not been vaccinated, not because I'm anti-vaccination at all. That's really the only one that I wouldn't take at this
Yeah.
moment. But um,
This was a
mainly,
very different.
it is. It's very different, and the way that it came about was very disconcerting to me. How
Hmm.
quickly it came about, and
Yeah.
how many, they didn't have really any regulations on it. It didn't seem like there were any trials done.
Well,
There
they
wasn't much
indemnify
research
themselves
done.
against lawsuits. I mean, if the first thing you're going to do is say, okay, before I start on this project, I'm going to insist that you pass a law that says no one can sue me if I screw it up. I'm going to have a little wariness of that product.
Yes, exactly. Right, right. And I think there was just, in a lot of ways, there was a movement of within the media and within whoever else
Yeah.
that really was pushing this, promoting it. And I think a lot of people became weary just because of how much it was being pushed, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
They got to
so,
sell something that hard, you know?
yeah, yeah. And so, I think there are a lot of Catholics, a lot of Christians, religious people in general, who are now um, kind of looking, and maybe too much, looking at the established medical community with a weary eye. We
Yeah.
can always go to an opposite extreme, right? And we don't want to do that. But um, I think it kind of woke people up a little bit to say, hey, whoa, we got to kind of think about this,
Yeah.
exactly what's going on here,
Well,
you know?
it was so extreme that in their marketing, I got kicked
Yes.
off YouTube for making fun of Dr. Fauci. I
Okay.
simply said that he reminded me of yogurt on Spaceballs. Merchandising, merchandising. That's where the real money is,
Oh my goodness.
And
Okay.
they kicked me off. They kicked me off for doing that. I mean,
Yeah. We'll see if I get kicked off for mentioning this. I don't know. But
I just said the emperor has no clothes. But
yeah. Yeah.
now, I first of all, when they were doing the vaccine and it was coming from aborted fetal cells, I said, nope, that's it. I'm not taking it. I
Yeah.
don't care what the Pope says about that one. On this one, I can disagree. He's not giving official church teaching, and I think he's dead wrong. But then I also have a family history. My grandfather died of ALS, Lou Gehrig's, and he developed symptoms after taking his first flu shot. So I am very careful about vaccines because
Oh,
what a vaccine does is it causes an immune response.
sure.
An immune response may be appropriate, or it can trigger an autoimmune disease if you're having that proclivity towards one. So that was another big factor for me. But then, when people who got the vaccine keep getting the virus, thought, well, I probably made the right choice on that. But there are herbs. I'll just mention a few, and I've got a lot of information on antiviral herbs in my Herbal Medicine for Preppers book. Back the Spanish flu epidemic following World War
Yeah.
One, that was horrible. It was way worse than COVID. I mean, you would go to work healthy, and by noon, you're spewing blood from your nose, spiking a fever, and drop dead.
Yeah. And it
COVID
was
was,
mostly young, healthy people,
yeah, and it really
correct?
hit the young, healthy people because the older generation had another version of the swine flu before then. So they had
Really? Oh.
their immune system was trained against
Oh.
that virus.
Okay.
They had inoculations at the time, which are a lot more like the COVID vaccine than the COVID vaccine is like a vaccination. It's really more like an inoculation. They weren't terribly effective. In fact, the only thing that was found to be effective against the swine flu was a member of the Artemisia family called Sweet Annie. Sweet Annie is a cousin to wormwood, and it's a native Artemisia to the Americas, and it's powerfully antiviral. And so herbs
Really?
like that are what I turn to first.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. In fact,
Interesting.
one of my favorite herbal formulas is called the Swedish Bitters. It was probably formulated by Saint Hildegard, and it looks like it was tinkered a little bit by Paracelsus.
Ah,
It really goes back to the ancient formula theriac and Mithridate, which was by King Mithridates. They wanted a universal cure-all for all poisonings. That's the beginning of it. But by the time St. Hildegard gets hold of it and a few others, they start using a lot of wormwood. And so it has several antiviral herbs in it: wormwood, angelica, licorice. And I take a little bit of that daily, and I think it's wonderful. It's a wonderful you have to buy it. It's a mixture of like 27 herbs. The best one comes from I think Switzerland. It's under the brand Schweden Balsam, and it's very good. Very good. I take that every day.
okay. Wow. Oh my goodness. So I think we're gonna have to wrap up here, but do you have anything you would like to say? Any sort of self promotions? I know you said you've written about what, 8 books? Is that
Yeah, I
right?
just published my 9th last week.
Ninth book. Okay.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I tend to write a bunch of them at a time. I have like 3 going at once, so they kind of come out all at once too.
Okay.
Yeah, so check me out at judsoncarroll.com or
Okay.
southernappalachianherbs.blogspot.com, I think it is. The podcast is Southern Appalachian Herbs Podcast. It's on Spreaker, and it's not necessarily regional. It's actually people from all over the world listen to it, so don't let the name put you off.
Yeah.
The books are all available on Amazon in print, or you can get a PDF from me. And I just want to say again, Parker, thanks so much for having me on your show. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you too, Judson. And for anybody watching, make sure to check Judson's work out. And yeah, God bless, and thank you so much.
Oh yeah, free Substack newsletter too. Don't forget that. I got a free
Oh,
Substack newsletter.
okay. How would people
That's
subscribe to that?
judsoncarroll.com. I just went
Okay.
ahead and put the URL on that. Or you can go to Judson Carroll, Master Herbalist.
Okay. And you can find, I put all those links that you gave me in
Awesome.
the show
Okay.
notes, so anybody can find all of your work in the show notes here. All
Great.
right. Well, thank you, Judson.
Thank you. Have a great one.
You too.